have a few questions for all of you, which we hope will put your work also in relation. But I would like to start with a question for Professor Yu Kongjian. You, after your studies in the United States and your work here, you returned to China in the late 90s, I believe, and you did a lot of work to advocate for a different way to teach landscape architecture in universities in China. And I would be curious to hear you speak to how this work gave way to a true transformation of this pedagogy, and also what is the place of the discipline in culture in China today?
Yes, as I just mentioned at the beginning, China has a long history, 5,000 years history. But the industrialization only been shrinked to 30 years, almost 30 years. We, from very agricultural civilization, all the way go to industrial civilization in 30 years. So as a byproduct, you will see we almost messed up the whole thousands years of heritage, both natural and cultural heritage. So cultural heritage, what I'm talking is we have two kinds of heritage. One is a high culture, which you depicted, this beautiful painting, the rockery, the beautiful Chinese traditional garden, which been, for very, very few elite. At the same time, we have a huge, 90% is lower culture, which is totally invisible. How do you cultivate the land? How do you adapt to the flood? How do you survive? No history. Almost no one, no poetry, no painting, no one talking about. When you go to the museum, go to the library here, everyone is talking about the Chinese culture. Actually, it's only this very minority elite culture. Only beauty. No farming, okay? No fighting against water. No survival wisdom. But, as I said, when we go through all these 30 years industrial urbanization, when we messed up, when you wiped out all this heritage, we suddenly feel that when we build our city based on this great infrastructure, the city failed. Almost all city fails because we have different climate. The climate is totally different from London, from European, which are developed countries. But we simply copy those great infrastructure and build the Chinese city overnight. That's why you need a new solution to solve the problem, to heal what we have messed up. The pollution, the flood, the drought, and the concrete. Now that's come out my solution. Go back to the farm, my root. I was born in a small village. I spent 17 years in the small village, and I know how you can live with a monsoon flood, how you can cultivate the land, how you create pond system to adapt to the monsoon flood, and use and recycle the water during the dry season, and recycle the nutrient in order to make it sustainable. So that's the landscape today, I think we need today, right? So how can you heal, how can you adapt this new planet? So that's different cultural landscape, different culture. So that when I come back, I create this, I think, new approach. Different from the gardening, wonderful heritage Chinese culture, but that's only for enjoyment, for pleasure making, for ornamental, to try to make some landscape which help to survive. Yes.
Joe Krista, what I loved about your project was that many of the work that you've been doing with Master Group is about landscape as agriculture, the work of design as something for non-human animals, gorillas, for mountains. It seems it's one of the reasons that we wanted to hear from you. In particular, I would love to know a little bit more about the specificity and the uniqueness of working in Rwanda, and your experiences as a landscape designer that are dealing often with the non-human, and not so much in the urban. We'd love to hear from you about that.
Yeah, thanks. I would say that we are privileged to work in Rwanda because it's a fast-developing country, and it has so many policies that are supporting in different sectors, and specifically working with our partners, we have created great collaboration with them, and I would even say that most of the design that we have, the different design approach we have on project have been adapted by others across the country through all the years we've been in Rwanda. And also, one thing that I would say that is kind of constricting somehow would be when it comes to a fast developing country that is also landlocked, sometimes getting the most sustainable materials can be a limit. So we have to partner with our client or our partners to see which materials work best, what can we find locally, and how can we adapt. And also most of our approach are innovative in a way that we try to adapt what is happening in the country, what is the culture, and we have to engage with the community to understand what will be the best solution to what they need, and at the same time innovate using what we have locally. So in few words, I would say that it's great working with in a country that is welcoming new ideas, that is very innovative in that sense, where we bring new ideas and approach in design, and they are well adapted, and we create great collaborations. Yeah.
Thank you. This is a question that I think probably we could ask all of you to respond to, but one thing that I wanted to pose to you specifically, Lisa, is of course we know that landscape architecture is a generative discipline where it's responsible in ways that are a bit different than buildings as units, is that they're responsible for creating communities. I mean, you showed the Gansfork Peninsula, for example. It's this idea of creating a new possibility within the city, but of course that requires on your behalf an anticipation of the time factor, how these communities will eventually appropriate themselves the spaces, but also how plants and natural elements will grow to create that space. So how do you factor in time within your design?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that landscape architects, I feel like, are sort of ingrained with having what I call like the long view. It's really embedded into our training and our thinking and our mindset, and it's kind of two different, more than two, multiple continuums. There's like the sites and the grounds that we work with. They have a long history before we arrive. There's a really deep, usually, engagement in history while we're working on them, and then there's like this long period once we leave, and we're no longer alive. And so I think there's like the past, present, futures idea, but then there's also like hour-to-hour subtleties, like even with the tides or with the sunlight, and there's like day and night subtleties, and people, for example, on the High Line, it's like, now you probably can't run there, but if you were to run, it's first thing in the morning, right, before anyone comes. And then there's the sort of seasonal variety. There's the sort of annual rhythms and celebrations and milestones, and parks are usually places that kind of mark that. So I think time is like, you have to see it in so many different ways, and I think some of that is very much thought through and perhaps intentionally designed. Some of it is more like invitational, or you sort of provide prompts and different ways for people to engage with the site and the place, and then some of it really just evolves on its own. And I think, it's probably some of the more rewarding things is when you see people using spaces, some of which you imagined and some of which you never, could have imagined. And I think just generally the notion of like landscape as a concept of something that matures and grows and sort of becomes healthier and stronger over time is perhaps even just a different framework than seeing it as something that decays and ages and loses, that over time. So it's kind of a beautiful metaphor to think about work and projects. And
yeah, we were actually talking a little bit about this with Professor Yu. I mean, you mentioned yesterday that in around 40 years, in around 100 years, 40% of our coastlines will be gone, right? And I think just to build on this question about time, this role of kind of imagination, science, information, science fiction, how do you prepare, how do you plan and prepare for this future? As part of your work, it's kind of involves so much creativity, but also you need all these facts and anticipation.
Yes, I think it's certainly we have this global climate issue, crisis. It is a crisis. Sea level rising, hot, fire, drought. Yesterday, you see just Brazil got flooded, and Libya got flooded, and Dubai got flooded. So the whole globe, we have a crisis. So, and there are two solutions. You can fix the sky, cut the carbon emission, but that's too late. The second solution is the landscape, the nature-based solution. And you have to think globally. You cannot just build walls surrounding Manhattan because water is over there. It's in Amazon, it's in Yangtze River, it's in Yangtze River. So think globally. That's planetary landscape. I will suggest that we have to really think this post-industrial landscape must be think as a globe. It is a globe. We have a period which make gardens. People make garden, individual gardens, European gardens, Chinese gardens, Middle East gardens. No, that's agricultural civilization. And here we come to New York. We build a Central Park. We have a green system. We have all these linear greenways. No, that's industrial civilization, serving the people, let the city to be within nature. Now we come to another civilization which needed to fix the whole globe. Now that's why my suggestion or my proposal is a sponge city, sponge region, sponge watershed, and a sponge planet to fix it, because 40% of the water actually come from the land, not actually come from ice cap. Come from the land. The ground is dropping. It's drying out. If we can fill in the underground water, the aquifer, we can virtually solve the problem by 50%.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the landscape, transformation of the global surface, and fix the planet, and eventually you create a healthy planet, and you solve both problems, carbon emission and adaptation, like that. So that's the future of landscape architecture. Yeah, that's in Bangkok, right in the middle of the city, and we done it in 1 year. Fix the CCPs in 1 year, a transformation. Solves the problem of flood. Yeah. You can see. Cheap, not expensive. Now, 90% of investment today is trying to build some high technology. And we didn't fix it. We cannot fix it, and it fails, almost fail. But we don't even invest 5% to this planet, to global service. If you invest the same amount of money to use a nature-based solution to landscape, we can virtually solve the problem. That's my imagination.
Very convincing. It's a very convincing proposition.
But it requires us all to work together.
Yes, exactly. It requires all of us to work together. You often place in opposition this idea of garden and landscape as a kind of also, dichotomy between, culture that is for the elite and then mass culture. So what you call a big foot and small foot aesthetics, which is a very clear and also convincing idea. And I perhaps want to hear from Joe Christa in how you think your work is related to shaping a culture, and also how you think that perhaps landscape is also a tool to teach certain values that you all share.
I'd love to talk about the campus of the Ellen DeGeneres, the Dynfossé. The landscape approach we had there was intentionally to be educational, whereby by recreating those spaces that we find in the park, we gave access to people who can't be in the park, like they say children who are not allowed, or people with disability. Now they can learn from the spaces we have designed. And also the scientists who used to spend weeks in the park trying to collect some data, now they can get it at the doorstep. Also, we had main features like interpretive, sorry, the trails that has signposts that shows different information that we should learn from. So we have like maybe a trail that teaches about the gorilla life or the ecologies we find in the park. So those trails are intentionally to be educational to people who are coming to the campus, who spend time there and get to learn more. And there are some parts where some area dedicated to reforestation where we tried 3 different methods of reforestation, and we are hoping that we collect data. It's already being collected right now on how large scale of reforestation, what will work better compared to what they've learned from the campus. So I would say that the landscape design approach we have is really straightforward educational, because a lot of people can learn from it, and you can see the changes within a few years. Yeah.
And Lisa, everybody in this room knows the High Line, but also I feel like everybody in the world knows the High Line somehow, right? Like talking of a planetary landscape, I was interested in your perspective on the idea of like influence, like case studies and the influence of these ideas. So with the High Line, this approach, which I know many people were involved, including board member Liz Diller, and we all see the impact, the instant impact of that story in New York and the replicas in cities all over the world, looking at available infrastructures, old applications for railways, or is it Underline in Miami, and from your perspective, is that something that is is there a kind of an intention? Is there a sort of intention with that? Is that a hope that you guys are kind of incubating ideas that could be applied elsewhere? Or is it, not, you kind of encourage people to be more sort of regional and bespoke and considered? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I think so when we started work on the High Line, and I actually worked on the original competition in 2004, and it was like my thesis project and my master's degree, so I have like a very long history with it.
The world expert on the High Line.
No. But it's, I think that there was one other global precedent, which was the Promenade Plantée in Paris, and we all actually went. There's some of the Friends of the Highline members here. We went together and traveled to see it, and I think that the Highline in its best kind of permutations is something that helps people to kind of see things anew, right? Because it was a piece of infrastructure that was really seen as an eyesore. It was actually slated to be torn down. And then it was galvanized by the community to save it. And but it's not the copy-paste thing. I think every place that sort of, whatever that infrastructure is or thing that you're sort of thinking of reusing, recycling, going back to the first presentation of the has to be specific to the place. And I think it is an inspiration for people also, just that it was able to be so successful. I mean, it's hard to believe it today, but there was lots of questions when we started about who would want to go there anyway. And it's sort of dark, and it cuts through the middle of the city, and it's kind of, so... I think that is inspiring. There's also lots of other narratives and things that have happened around it that, we're also investigating and looking into in terms of, some of the things that have happened post the High Line that aren't necessarily the High Line's fault, but gentrification and all of these other things that are happening that are sort of part of that story as well, which is why it was great to see Asima here, because the network, tries to share these things and actually talk about them with community leaders and others who have these ideas. So it's not something that is sort of shied away from. It's actually, intentionally looked at up front. But I would just say that, in terms of some of the things that Kang Jung-yu is saying, I think this idea of figuring out a way to go beyond property lines and look at the scale of the problem, at the scale of the watershed, at the scale of the planet, that it's not, yes, we still have to deal with all of the permits and property lines and this, that, and the other, but it just feels like it's shocking to me that we can't all work together and find, even these resiliency projects in and around New York, it's you're okay, but this is here and this is here, and you realize there's this vulnerable gap in the middle that none of this is protected if that, so I do think that's incredibly important to be able to kind of come up and look at the problem at the scale of the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if any of you perhaps want to respond to this, but Professor Yu, you have kind of on this question of influence and working together, you have sort of famously wrote, textbook manuals for city mayors and really, try to kind of foster this awareness across, not only within your own discipline and colleagues, but on a political and administrative scale. So what are the next steps for, for all of you? I think this is a question, in terms of, growing collaborative work and where to situate the discourse of landscape for it to be the most effective and collaborative. Yeah.
Yes. I should thank Michael Sorkin. He is a citizen of New York, who translated my book called Letter to Leaders of China. I literally sent many letters to top leadership in China and convince them to take this nature-based solution, sponge city, and protection of watershed and this. Actually, tomorrow I fly to Vatican, to Italy, also to speak about how can we actually have very totally different vision about how can we solve the planet problem. Right now, we are always narrow-minded. Carbon, think of carbon. Water, think of water. So I think that's the problem. This globe is land-based. It is nature-based. And the professions that deal with nature-based, that design with nature-based, it's landscape, right? It's landscape, design with nature. Yeah. So, and it certainly, you have to think about retention of water, keeps water, slow down water, and adapt to water. That's the whole, when you deal with water, you solve the problem of heat. When you have water, you create biodiversity. When you have water in the city, you virtually cool off the city. So it's a holistic solution to deal with planet issues. Not single-minded, not just try to use concrete and steel to protect the city. That's because that will create more carbon. That's the tragedy of industrial civilization. And also just focus on carbon. Carbon is everywhere. So it's become a tragedy of commons. How can you trade carbon? It's a greenwash for many companies, right? You get a carbon credit, and you buy from Amazon, a piece of Amazon, and you
monetizing carbon.
Yeah, more carbon production here. So I think that doesn't work very well. Maybe we certainly need to cut carbon emission, but we don't forget that we have to deal with from backyard to the stream watershed, and think about the planet. That I think that may be the only solution. Yeah, the nature-based solution.
Well, I feel like it goes back. Like we've come so far from learning from our ancestors, and that's very like this idea of environmental reciprocity and indigenous cultures that sort of have been doing this for as long as humans have walked, the earth. I mean, this is part of this culture of care and understanding that we're not just taking, but we're giving, and everything is interconnected, and we're part of nature ourselves. And I mean, it's just a very different mindset.
Yeah. Well, when you think about that, usually you think globally, act locally. It seems you think like it's too big. The global surface is too big, but actually not. When you look at how the Aztec people, the Mexican people doing with terracing the slope, how the Chinese people terracing the slope to grow rice, how the people in Pearl River Delta area, they cultivate this rice for 1,000 years, and transforms the marsh into productive pond and dike system, and build the city, and it's beautiful, productive, biodiversity, healthy. And Indonesia, rice paddies, been there for 1,000 years. So I think that we have to learn from this, I call it the art of survival, not the art of ornament, the art of survival. That can make today, can we save today, the global issues. Because when certainly the European industrialization, which creates this city-built model, like the Dutch model here. At that time, the climate is mild, okay? The climate is mild. So we copy this kind of urbanization model, dump into India, dump to China, dump to Singapore, and those areas actually are monsoon area. So all cities fail because this great infrastructure simply have no resilience. Yeah. Are you going to invest again, or you can fix this kind of hard concrete infrastructure? That can be $1 trillion. For example, New York. Maybe you can invest, you can afford that. But can India afford that? Can China afford that? Can the globe afford that? No.
Well, and it has one purpose, and there's no co-benefits, right? I mean, It does one thing only.
Yeah. So I think we have to rethink this way we deal with the problem.
So I think that, at least from my perspective, that is a pretty exciting place to
survive.
To leave us all with at least this passion. And I think we're all feeling very energized by all of your words and your projects, and feeling that one of the principles of investigating landscape is to kind of expand the role of architecture and the role of an architecture organization like the World Around to be including these conversations. And for at least for us, this is just the beginning. And so I really thank you, Lisa, Jo Christa, Congenu, and Beatrice for this incredible panel that I think gives us so much to think about. So thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.